Hello, Mishpucha, it's Courtney, America's Jewish mother, and I am back to introduce my reading vlog for the Octofinals round of the BookTube prize. So I am judging for this round nonfiction, and I believe I'm in Group D, as in dog, but if that's wrong, I'll put it somewhere over here. So there are 6 books that I have to read for this round, and I've already read 2 of them, and I'm working on a 3rd, so I'm going to give you a little update on the ones that I already read after I tell you what all of them are. So I'm reading Nadia Owusu's Aftershocks, White Magic by Elissa Washuta, The Groundbreaking by Scott Ellsworth, Real Estate by Deborah, Levy or Levy, I'm not sure which one it is. Orwell's Roses by Rebecca Solnit, and Chasing Me to My Grave, an artist memoir of the Jim Crow South by Winfred, Rembert, as told to Aaron I. Kelly. So that's it. So those are the 6 books that I have to read for this round of the BookTube prize. So I have already finished reading Aftershocks by Nadia Owusu and White Magic by Elissa Washuta. I read those both as ebooks, which is why I don't have them here to hold up and show you. I'm currently working on Scott Ellsworth's The Groundbreaking. I'm listening to it as an audiobook. So here's some impressions of the 2 books that I've already read. So Aftershocks was kind of all over the place for me. I felt like it lacked organization. Basically, Nadia Owusu talks about her life, and she grew up in a bunch of different countries because her father worked for the United Nations in some capacity, I believe. And she also had a stepmother that's been part of her life for a long time, and her mother abandoned her at a fairly young age, and she has a lot of sort of complicated feelings about how she's never really been able to reconnect to her mother. Even though she knows where the mother is, she's reached out to her before, and the mother just seems to not really want to have anything to do with her. She also lost her father to cancer at a fairly young age, and so she was, I think, 13 or 14 when her father passed from cancer, and he was only, I think, somewhere in his 30s maybe. So she also talks about the sort of complicated relationship that she and her sister have with their stepmother. So that's pretty much the basis of it. She also talks about her time living in various countries, but a lot of it's based in Italy and the United States. So that's pretty much the premise of the memoir. And parts of it were interesting. Like, certainly she's had a unique life and has had unique life experiences that a lot of people would not have had and might be interested to read about. But like I said, for me, the book really lacked organization. It just seemed to kind of float around from topic to topic, and it would go sort of back and forth in time with no real explanation for why she was doing that. So even though her life story is interesting, and certainly in some ways I related to it, especially the part of her part about her father dying from cancer, so I related to it on that level. But yeah, I just really felt like it lacked a lot of organization, so I ended up giving it 2.5 stars. And yeah, I'm not sure I would recommend it because it is sort of so unfocused to me, even though I can see why other people might find it interesting. So that's Aftershock. So the second book that I've already finished reading was White Magic by Elissa Washuta. So this is allegedly an essay collection. Allegedly. And it's basically sort of centered around astrology, witchcraft, tarot, all that kind of stuff. But it's also a lot about her toxic relationships with men. And I have to tell y'all, never in my life have I wanted to reach through the, well, I guess not pages, but screen of my computer, pull out the author of the book, shake her, and say, stop dating shit men and value yourself more. Because that was pretty much how I felt like reading almost the whole book. She especially talks a lot about an ex-boyfriend of hers named Carl, and I don't know why she's so hung up on this dude. He does not sound special or good at all, but she also has a lot of trauma in her past, and so I think she seems really attached to him because of an absence of a lot of negativity. So, like, he's not, say, abusive to her openly, or, you know, like, he's not, like, physically violent, doesn't sexually assault her, etc., etc. Which, I mean, like, I don't think the basis of a relationship is that a man doesn't do abusive things to you. Like, that this does not sustain the relationship. Also, she seems really way too into this idea that she cannot exist as an entity without a man, without being in a relationship with a man, and I just, I cannot get on board with that at all. So yeah, this one really rubbed me the wrong way. I basically was hate reading it from beginning to the end, and yeah, unless there's like a surprise, you know, book that's coming up that's somehow going to be even worse than this, I'm sure this will probably be my lowest ranked book of the BookTube prize. Now, I did end up giving it 2 stars because it's organized in an interesting way, although not in necessarily a good way, I think. It has, I think, some of the same problems for me that Aftershocks had, where I just feel like it kind of lacks central organization, although I feel like it has more organization than Aftershocks does. But it's very almost stream of consciousness style, where it's not like each individual essay has a real point to it. It's almost like she's trying to work out how she feels about stuff, but she's in the process of doing that, rather than an essay where she's already worked out how she felt and then wants to, like, share that with you by leading you through the events that led her there. She has not figured it out yet. So this really just didn't work for me for a number of reasons. So I ended up giving it 2 stars. And I gave it 2 stars because, like I said, it did have a sort of interesting organizational style, and I feel like you might like it, especially, I mean, some people might like it, especially if you're into, say, Twin Peaks or astrology or tarot, or like some of the other subjects that she tends to rattle on about a lot. You might like it for that reason. But yeah, this just did not work for me at all, and God, I hope I don't read another book that's as bad as this one for this round. So anyway, so those are the 2 books I've already read. I'm currently listening to The Groundbreaking by Scott Ellsworth, which is about the 1921 Tulsa riots. It's reminding me a lot of David Zucchino's book Wilmington's Lie that I read last year for the BookTube prize, although I have to say this one is more interesting to me than Wilmington's Lie. So so it's going okay so far. I'm not like, oh, this is amazing, I gotta keep listening to it, but it's fine. It's solidly fine right now. So I will come back on here when I finish The Groundbreaking to give you more thoughts about that. And then probably the next book I'll read after that is the Winfred Rembert, Chasing Me to My Grave. So I will see you in my next clip. And we're back. So I have finished 2 more books for the BookTube prize. I finished The Groundbreaking by Scott Ellsworth, which I listened to as an audiobook, and I finished Chasing Me to My Grave, an artist memoir of the Jim Crow South by Winfred Rembert, as told to Aaron I. Kelly. So I ended up giving The Groundbreaking by Scott Ellsworth 3.5 stars. This was a book that is largely about the Tulsa race riot / massacre of 1921, I believe. So it's about what happened, kind of the tensions and things leading up to the massacre, and then how the massacre's history was buried for quite a long time, knowingly buried for quite a long time for several different reasons, mostly white racism, of course, but other reasons too. And then about how the truth of it eventually sort of comes out, and people start talking about it and writing about it more and more. So I liked this book overall. I thought Ellsworth does a really good job of scene setting at the beginning and describing how Tulsa looked and what Black Tulsa looked like prior to the massacre. And I also sort of enjoyed hearing about, well, I mean, in as much as you can enjoy this, right? Enjoyed hearing about how the story was sort of covered up and buried for a number of years until people kind of started poking around and sort of uncovering more and more about it. I did think toward the last third or so of the book, it turns into too much of like, I, Scott Ellsworth, am the real hero of the story. Now, I mean, he never says that, to be fair, but it just seemed to get a little bit more focused on him and his adventures, and I was like, this is in bad taste. So, should be more focused on what actually happened in the massacre and less on you, author of the book. So, like I said, so I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. I did think it was interesting, and I did think it was well written, even if, like I said, I think toward the end it got a little bit too focused on the author for my personal taste, and a little bit less focused on the actual events of the massacre. But it was good overall, and I would recommend it as a history of the massacre and of the subsequent cover-up. So I also finished Chasing Me to My Grave by Winfred Rembert, and it says on the book, as told to Aaron I. Kelly, and certainly I can envision that this book was like Aaron I. Kelly just literally sat down with Winfred Rembert for, you know, however many interviews and just recorded what he said and then pretty much transcribed it more or less exactly as he said it when she was interviewing him. About his life, because it reads very much like someone telling you multiple stories about their life. So it's told in a kind of simple but very engaging style. But yeah, it definitely has the feel of these were interviews, you know, oral interviews that were then just sort of transcribed into written form. But I think Winfred Rembert does a really good job of telling the various stories of his life. I found them quite engaging, and I ended up giving this book 4 stars. So he pretty much starts from the beginnings of his life and recounts a number of things that happened to him. So he was almost lynched when he was 17 or 18 years old. He spent some time in jail and then prison. He also did quite well for himself for a number of years, including being involved with drugs, which then landed him in prison again. And then after he got out the second time, it took him a really long time to kind of build a life for himself and his family. His wife, Patsy, he is clearly very devoted to. Like, every time he talks about her, it is with such love and affection. I really have to admire that kind of relationship. And they had 8 children together, so that was a lot to take care of. And it was not until he was 50 years old that he started doing the paintings that he eventually became famous for. So what he did was he would take leather, like a portion of leather, and he would do a drawing, and then he would trace the drawing into the leather with some kind of knife. I forget what the knife was called, but it was some type of knife that he would use to put the drawing into the leather. And then he would bevel it, and he used some other kinds of tools for textural purposes. And then he painted it with dyes. And so that was really interesting. I'd never heard of anyone doing anything like that before. And he talks about in here how he'd never seen anyone doing anything like that before either, which is probably why his work became the subject of interest and fascination. Now, he actually passed away just last year. So it's good that this book was already being worked on at that point. So the book has, like I said, a number of stories about his life, which I found very engagingly told. He's a very good storyteller. And then it's interspersed with various paintings that he did. So this is a painting he did of a lynching that he remembers from his youth. This is one he did of his mother, the woman who raised him, which I think was actually his he's either his aunt or his grandmother, I can't remember now, in the kitchen with him and his sister. And then here's one of a baptism. So these are all paintings that are done on leather and then dyed with leather dyes. So yeah, just a really fascinating story of this man's life and a really fascinating artistic medium that he ultimately chose to convey various stories of his life. So yeah, would definitely recommend this if you're interested in art and or the reminiscences of someone who grew up in rural Georgia and had a variety of adventures before finally sort of finding fame at an older age. So yeah, it definitely gives you a very good idea of kind of the differences between growing up black and white in the Jim Crow South for sure. So 4 stars, would definitely recommend. And thus far, this has been my favorite of the BookTube Prize books that I've read for this round. So I have 2 other books that I still have left to read. One is an essay collection by Rebecca Solnit called Orwell's Roses. I'm going to start that one next. And then the last one is another memoir by Deborah Levy called, I don't remember the name of it. I'll put it over here. So I will come back again when I have thoughts about those 2 books. And we're back. So I read my last 2 books for the BookTube Prize, and I submitted my rankings yesterday. And so the last 2 books that I read were Orwell's Roses by Rebecca Solnit and Real Estate by Deborah Levy. So Orwell's Roses, I ended up giving 3.75 stars to. This is an essay collection that is about, as the title implies, both George Orwell and also roses. So Orwell grew some roses while he was living at a certain country location, and Rebecca Solnit kind of becomes interested in that, and it's kind of an interweaving of various aspects of Orwell's life, and then also a lot about the actual flower of roses and aspects surrounding them, which doesn't necessarily right off sound super interesting, but it actually, I actually ended up quite liking this because I feel like it made me think, which I appreciate about it. So it made me think quite deeply. I'm not super well read in George Orwell anyway, so I was interested to hear more about him and his life, and flowers, I just don't tend to give all that much thought to, not being a person with a green thumb myself. So I really appreciated the depth with which she looked at the topic. So 3.75 stars. And then the last book I read was Real Estate by Deborah Levy. This is a memoir. It is, to my understanding, the 3rd in a trilogy. Although I don't think you have to read the other 2 to read this. And basically, this was kind of stream of consciousness. It's all centered around a certain period in her life where she's around 60 and her kids are leaving or have already left the nest, so to speak. And she spends a lot of time thinking about kind of her dream house and location and things like that. But stream of consciousness doesn't really work for me overall. I'm not particularly moved by it. I don't really respond well to it. And I feel like I kind of get what she's doing here, because I mean, I feel like Proust basically just did a bunch of stream of consciousness rambling in À la recherche du temps perdu, and people called it brilliant. But I also haven't read that either. So I appreciated the kind of feminist elements of this book. And I think if you do like stream of consciousness stuff and you don't mind sort of being taken along on a ride with no real clear endpoint inside, I think she finally kind of does come to a conclusion at the very end. But I feel like we could have gotten there faster. And yeah, as someone who teaches argumentative and persuasive writing, I always tell students to lead with your thesis in the introductory paragraph and then build your argument in support of it, because the reader can more clearly follow the thread of your argument if you do that. And this does that thing where she basically saves her thesis to the very last page or two. And it would have made a lot more sense if she had just started with it up front. So anyway, I think some people would like this. It didn't totally work for me. I was like, it's fine. So I ended up giving it 3 stars. So my final rankings for this round ended up being in the number 6 position. So the book that I liked the least was White Magic by Elissa Washuta. Number 5, which I gave 2 stars. Number 5 was Aftershocks by Nadia Owusu, which I ended up giving 2.5 stars. Number 4 was Real Estate by Deborah Levy, which I gave 3 stars. Number 3 was The Groundbreaking by Scott Ellsworth, which I gave 3.5 stars. Number 2 was Orwell's Roses by Rebecca Solnit, which I gave 3.75 stars. And number 1 was Chasing Me to My Grave by Winfred Rembert, which I gave 4 stars. So those are my rankings. I will be curious to hear the quarterfinals pairing announcement from Robert. Which will already have gone up by the time you see this video. So thank you for watching this. If you have thoughts about any of these books, especially if you also had this round for the BookTube prize, I'm very curious to hear your rankings, so let me know about that. Thank you for watching. I hope you're all staying healthy and well. And until next time, would it kill you to call you mother?